fair warning, I am filming this 2 days prior to the US election, so if I look a bit disheveled and anxious, it's because I have been for the last 2 weeks, which means that today's review could not come at a better time. Hey everyone, welcome back to Women in Film Reviews. My name is Helen, and today we have our first repeat director. That is because in this episode, we are going to be talking about Greta Gerwig's 2019 adaptation of Louisa May Alcott's Little Women. This is Gerwig's second solo directorial outing following 2017's Lady Bird, for which she was the 5th woman in the history of the Academy Awards to be nominated for Best Director. Lady Bird is one of my all-time favorite films, and I actually reviewed it during season 1 of Women in Film Reviews, so if you want to go check that out, go right ahead. But make sure you come back here when you're done. Little Women was released on Christmas Day 2019 in the United States and ended up grossing a little over $200 million worldwide. Little Women received near universal critical acclaim. It currently sits at 95% on Rotten Tomatoes, and it garnered numerous award nominations, including nods for 6 Oscars. Don't worry, we will get into what those nominations were for a little bit later. Little Women follows the journeys of the 4 March sisters, Meg, Jo, Beth, and Amy, in 2 timelines. One in 1868, which for the purpose of this movie is the present, where all of the girls are adults, and one set in the past, starting in 1861, where they are growing up with their mother Marmee in Concord, Massachusetts. Together, they navigate life, ambition, love, and their own differences as sisters as the world changes around them. There have been many different adaptations of Little Women, including a 1994 version starring Winona Ryder that for many is considered the gold standard. So when a new version of the story was announced by Sony back in 2013, there was some discussion about whether a new adaptation of the book would be warranted. As it turns out, not only was it absolutely warranted, but it was so absolutely necessary. I actually came into this movie completely blind. I had not read this book. I had not seen any of the adaptations. I knew a little bit of the plot points, but overall, I had just never really been interested in checking it out. But what really sold me on seeing this film in cinemas the day it came out was that Greta Gerwig wrote and directed it. What I loved most about Lady Bird was that it took something that could have been so cliche and ordinary, like one girl's experience of senior year in high school, and she just made it so unique and relatable and real so that you are rooting for these characters by the end because you've gotten to know them. I saw myself on screen basically, and that really moved me. One of my initial hang-ups about reading the book for Little Women and seeing any of the adaptations was I was worried that I wouldn't be able to relate to these characters. Period pieces tend to be quite stuffy, everybody seems to talk a bit stilted, but if anyone was going to take these characters and make them real and raw and exciting, it would be Greta Gerwig. The biggest change that Gerwig made in adapting the book was to change the timeline of events in the film. In the book, which is actually 2 books that chronicle 2 different parts of the girls' lives, the story is more or less told linearly from their childhood into their adulthood. What Gerwig realized in her writing process is that in those 2 distinct parts of the book, there are events that more or less mirror each other and each other's emotional beats. In choosing to tell the story in such a non-linear way, she can actually put these parallel scenes one right after the other instead of waiting from beginning to the end of the movie to get those similar beats. You can heighten the emotion. This also allows the audience to draw connections between events that happened to the main characters in the past and how it shaped the women they have become in the present. Gerwig also uses visual language to distinguish between the past and the present, particularly with tone and color. Present, which is the first timeline that we are shown and where we meet Jo and Amy for the first time as adults, is colored with cool tones and with a little vibrancy, with lots of blues, blacks, grays, and other drab colors. The past, on the other hand, is very warmly tinted with lots of vibrant colors, including greens, reds, yellows, oranges, along with a lot of pastel shades as well. There almost seems to be a halo around the events that take place in the past. almost as though they are rose-colored memories of childhood that our characters are remembering in the present. For example, in the present, when Jo hears that Beth is sick and goes back to Concord to help care for her, she falls asleep on the train on the way there, and when she falls asleep, the film then switches to the past. When we return to the past following that segment, she is still asleep on the train and is being woken by a porter when they arrived at her destination. This would lead the viewer to believe that Jo was dreaming about a childhood memory that we have just seen. The difference in time is also seen in the incredible costumes by Jacqueline Duran. This is especially important with Amy, who is the youngest of the March sisters, who is 13 in the past and 20 in the present, two very different ages to portray on film by the same actress. Amy is dressed in very youthful clothes in the past. Her hair is styled in a fringe, and her clothes that she wears have little to no shape to them. As an adult, Amy is a proper Victorian lady in Paris, with big hoop skirts, tops that accentuate her figure, and her childhood fringe is replaced by elegant updos. The costumes also serve to highlight the closeness of the relationships that the characters have with each other. When Jo befriends Laurie, the rich neighbor's grandson, they are shown to have swapped several of their clothes with each other. Not only does it signify the closeness of their relationship, but it also signifies Jo's reluctance to conform to the role expected of women in her time period by wearing clothes that are typically associated with men. And when Laurie returns to Massachusetts in the present, he and Jo's different styles of clothing show just how far they have drifted apart. Jo still wears some of the rundown clothes that we've seen her in throughout the film, while Laurie is very polished and dressed in high fashion, emphasizing how far he has come as a character. Just to emphasize how right he and Amy were together rather than he and Jo, he and Amy in the present now have much more similar fashion choices. Jo also has a particular military-inspired coat that she wears while she writes, further signifying that writing was not necessarily appropriate for women and is much more seen as a male trade during this time. Of course, Jo is essentially writing the story of her family, which, in Writing Little Women, Louisa May Alcott basically did 150 years ago. And in this film, you really get the sense that this is a real close family in every sense of the word. As I said before, Greta Gerwig is excellent at writing dialogue that makes her characters real and well-developed and lived in, and this film is no different. As opposed to the stiff, proper dialogue that is common in a lot of period films, here, Gerwig's characters talk in free-flowing manner when everything pops into their heads, and characters are often talking over each other, which honestly is how families really do interact. The Marches are just like any other family in that they talk a million miles a minute and they often talk over each other, and they know each other so well, but they also at times really hate each other. See 13-year-old Amy's burning of Jo's writing as revenge for not taking her to a play. There are two scenes that I would point to as really good examples of this free-flowing dialogue and talking over each other. The first is when Laurie brings Meg and Jo back from the dance after we first meet him, and everyone is talking over each other and trying to fawn over Meg, and this is how Laurie meets the March family for the first time. The second instance is when the entire March family goes to the Lawrence mansion to get Amy after she gets in trouble in school. These scenes are both relatively quite short, but we get to know each character a little bit more, and we get to see this family dynamic in action. It is no wonder that someone like Laurie and Mr. Lawrence, who live a relatively lonely lifestyle in this huge mansion, would want to be a part of something so vibrant and loving. I haven't talked about the acting yet, mostly because I need to say something beyond everybody in this movie is amazing and they're all great and I love them and I would die for them. I loved Saoirse Ronan in Lady Bird, and she is excellent here again. She is the perfect Jo. Smart, passionate, and engaging all the way through. She might also be one of my celeb crushes. I see a lot of myself as a writer in this version of Jo, and honestly, it does make me mentally kick myself a little bit for not having read the book earlier. Many of her frustrations at trying to make it as a writer are the same as a lot of the things that I'm going through. Amy, as I have heard, is actually a bit of a despised character in the book, and Florence Pugh, bless her, is so good at making Amy seem sympathetic and she's just mesmerizing all the way through. Not only does she have the tough job of trying to portray a character as a child and as an adult interchangeably, something that the 1994 version got around by having Amy played by two different actresses, but she also has to draw a believable through line between a lot of the bratty actions that Amy takes in the past and connect them to the jaded adult that Amy has become in the present. And Florence Pugh toes the line perfectly. She draws Amy's ambition and inspiration to be great at everything she does from her insecurities when she was younger at being second to Jo in almost every aspect of her life. Meeting Amy as an adult first, where she still has some of that childhood giddiness in her when she sees Laurie for the first time in years, is so important to getting the audience on Amy's side before we see some of the bratty actions that she did in the past. Emma Watson as Meg is the sensible oldest sister of the four. She does a brilliant job of trying to reconcile her want of nice things with her guilt over not being satisfied at being poor. This is something that I think I and a lot of women can relate to when we get scolded for wanting more than what society deems is enough for us or should be enough for us. The character of Beth, the arguably most selfless of the sisters, could have been played in an overly righteous manner, but Eliza Scanlon brings out a sort of quietness and shyness that makes her sympathetic throughout. She just wants to be of help to everyone in her life, including her mother and her sisters, and not step on anyone's toes in the process. When Beth admits to Jo later on in the film that she has figured out that she's probably going to die soon from this illness, Scanlon just brings this sense of calm to this scene that is almost devastating. She is content to enjoy the time that she has left with her family, and though she says she's not afraid of dying, you can tell that there's still a bit of fear about it in her voice. And I think that complexity there is just so important. While it would be tempting to make Jo the out-and-out main character of this movie, indeed, she is the one who writes the book within the film, each of these four characters is fully fleshed out thanks in no small part to the actresses who inhabit them, and I'm able to see bits of myself in each of them. The supporting cast is excellent as well, from Laura Dern as Marmee, this incredibly righteous and loving woman who seems to have it all together on the outside, but does privately admit to Jo that she struggles to reconcile her situation, to Timothy Chalamet as the love-struck Laurie, to Chris Cooper as Mr. Lawrence, Bob Odenkirk as Mr. March, Louis Garrel as Mr. Bear, Tracy Letts as the publisher, Mr. Dashwood, and of course, Meryl Streep as the unlikable Anna March. There is not one weak link among them, and they all play into why this new adaptation is necessary as a feminist piece. There is a conversation toward the end of the film where the three surviving March sisters have finally reunited, and Jo is telling them a little bit about the book that she's writing, a book about their lives. She worries that no one will be interested in it because, well, domestic tales aren't important enough. Amy counters that people probably don't think they're important because they just haven't been written about, and maybe therefore by Jo writing about it, then they will become important. Even today, books, movies, art in general that doesn't center around earth-shattering developments, or at least what the patriarchy considers to be important, are seen as frivolous and meaningless. It's why you see war epics hailed as award season darlings and very good romantic comedies deemed as, well, a chick flick. I would argue, and I think that Gerwig and Alcott would both agree with me here, that the vast majority of us don't live these extraordinary lives that we see in front of us on the page or on the screen. But that doesn't mean that the domestic lives that we live are unimportant. So why shouldn't we see that reflected in the art that we see? The fact that Louisa May Alcott even got Little Women published in the first place is a major feat, because writing wasn't just something that a woman did back then, or at least did acceptably, and therefore a lot of the struggles that women thought were important weren't portrayed in art until she came along and did it. She made them important, and everyone who was told their story since has made their experiences important. Every piece of modern feminist activism has come about because a woman told a story of their experience, and other women looked at that experience and said, hey, that was mine, and then continued to tell their stories, from sexuality to race to gender identity to abuse and love and, yes, domestic life. Women are seeing other women tell their stories, and they're realizing that they're not alone and that their stories are important. Little Women is a 150-year-old story, and yet I was able to see aspects of myself in each of the 4 main characters. And the story has lasted this long because generation after generation after generation of women have had the exact same experience that I did. And each adaptation of the novel is a reflection of the women who made it and saw it at that time. Greta Gerwig's adaptation that we have now is a reflection of what it means to be a woman in 2019. And 20 years from now, we will probably have another adaptation that means something different to the women of that time. That being said, this is a film about white characters in the North, and although it does take place during the Civil War, that's why their father is away fighting, they are about as far removed from the Civil War as it's possible to be at that point. There are 2 direct references to slavery throughout the film, although they are fleeting. One in which Amy is in school and her classmates are debating the topic of slavery, poorly, I must admit. And the other when Marmee is volunteering alongside a black woman named Susan. When Marmee remarks that she used to be so ashamed of her country, Susan deftly reminds her that she still should be. This is a very cold reminder that 150 years later, we as a country have so much to be ashamed about in terms of the way that we have handled the issue of race, and especially just how far we still have to go in that respect. We really do. With regard to sexuality, there have been a fair few interpretations, particularly about Jo, and whether she is a lesbian or bisexual, or if she's asexual, or if she is genderqueer. I think that there could be a number of arguments for this interpretation, or any of these interpretations, and perhaps I would have liked to have it explored more in this version. But I think Gerwig's main point here in how she characterizes Jo is to emphasize how dissatisfied she is with society's expectation of her as a woman, which is to get married and have lots of kids. On the flip side, Gerwig also takes care to iterate that wanting a domestic life and a family is not an illegitimate goal. Meg's struggles as a wife and a mother are treated as just as importantly as Amy and Jo's struggles to try to identify themselves outside of marriage throughout. In the end, Jo does get her book published, and she opens a school with the money that Aunt March left her in her will, as well as Aunt March's house. But Gerwig does something a little bit different here. There is one long shot in the film that one would think to be the ending shot of the movie, where everybody in this new extended family is together at Jo's new school and just having a wonderful time. But the real happy ending, the one that we see in the present with all of the cool tones and dull colors that have been established throughout, is Jo getting her book published and keeping the copyright to it. She does change the ending of the book to make the character that is a stand-in for herself marry the professor that has shown interest in her throughout the movie. Side note, I think Gerwig did the character of Professor Bear a favor in making him a young, attractive man and not an older man as he is in the book. We see them married and in a happy life, but we see that in the warm, vibrant, and bright colors that we have come to associate with the past. And we are wondering if we are really seeing the happy ending to Jo's story, or if we are seeing the ending that Jo reluctantly wrote into her book. But Jo still wrote it, and she is able to write, publish, and tell her own story on her own terms. And this perfectly bookends her quest to get published that started with the very opening frame of the movie. If Jo can tell her own story, then so can Greta Gerwig, as she did with Lady Bird, and so can you, and so can I. Now, we need to talk about this film's legacy and how the film kind of proved its own point about stories about domestic struggle not being important to people in real life, or at least to the powers that be at the Academy. Almost from the word go, Little Women was considered an Oscar contender. It is an adaptation of a classic. It has an Academy Award nominated director behind it. It's a period piece. It came out at the end of the year during the height of awards season, and it got rave reviews. All of the dots were there. So when the big awards bodies started handing out nominations for their awards, there was a bit of radio silence on this film. Despite the critical acclaim for this movie and the praise in particular for the methods and tools that Greta Gerwig used to tell this story on a technical level, she managed to receive no nominations for screenwriting or directing at the Golden Globes, and while she did get a screenwriting nod from the Academy, they failed to nominate her for Best Director, while the movie itself got 6 nominations. This left me floored, and I think a lot of critics will agree with me. Perhaps in the old white male voting body of the Academy, they thought that her one nomination for Lady Bird should have been enough for her. Perhaps that's why none of the 5 women who've been nominated for Best Director have been nominated more than once. Some critics thought that maybe this film didn't have anything important enough to say. It wasn't a sweeping mafia drama like The Irishman. It wasn't a twist on the superhero genre like Joker was. It wasn't a powerful war piece like 1917. But domestic struggles and normal people's lives are just as important. Some people just said that she didn't have as strong of a directorial vision as some of her compatriots. That is, to use the technical term here, straight up bullshit. Greta Gerwig had a meticulous vision for the story that she wanted to tell and the way that she wanted to tell it that I have just spent an entire video talking in detail about. For my money, the fact that Little Women wasn't nominated for Best Editing or Best Cinematography is just baffling to me, because those are the 2 tools that she used to make this version of the story work. Even the nominations that it got and the one Oscar that it did win are kind of indicative of what the Academy thought this movie was good for. Gerwig's screenplay was nominated, as I said before, as were Saoirse Ronan and Florence Pugh for their performances. It did garner a nomination for Best Picture, which, you know, they needed one token female movie in there. It was nominated for costume design because it is a period piece, and that is just what period pieces do. And it also got a Best Score nomination because Alexander Desplat did it, and it is very good, and everybody likes Alexander Desplat. But the fact that the one Oscar that this amazing, powerful, feminist, female-fronted piece got was for its clothing tells you all you need to know about what the Academy thought was important about this movie. Don't get me wrong, I was very happy to see Parasite win all the awards that it did this year, and yes, I know that awards should not dictate the quality of a film or whether or not you personally enjoy it. The existence of the Best Animated Feature category should really be proof enough of that on its own. How to Train Your Dragon was robbed. I just came out of this ceremony just discouraged about how women, and especially women who direct, are thought of in this industry along with the films that they produce. They're nice, but not, to use a phrase from our beloved Meryl, groundbreaking. Sure, Jan. Heck, My two other favorite films of 2019, Booksmart and Hustlers, got no awards love whatsoever from the Academy. But they, along with Little Women, are so much more important to me as a filmmaker than any of the male-centric movies that won that night. And that's not to discount the quality of those movies. I'm sure they're great, but they just didn't connect with me. Let me put things in perspective here to end things off. When I watch a movie at home, typically I am tempted at least once or twice throughout the movie to pick up my phone and maybe like scroll Twitter or Facebook or something. This happens with even some of my very favorite movies, and it's not their fault. It's just I admittedly can get a little bit distracted during a movie if I'm watching it at home. When I sat down to rewatch Little Women for this review, I was not tempted to pick up my phone once. I was absolutely mesmerized and engaged and just enjoying everything that this movie did. That is how much I love and adore this movie with every fiber of my being, and just how important it is to me. And it is the comfort movie that I needed this weekend to get away a little bit from my election anxiety. And this movie and Lady Bird is also living proof that Greta Gerwig should direct the Wicked movie, Don't At Me. Thank you guys so much for watching this week's Women in Film review. As you can probably tell, I'm filming this a little bit later in the day, which means that the light has changed from coming from outside to coming from my kitchen light, so apologies for that. I hope that you all are well and staying safe. As this video is going up tomorrow, we are going to be heading into a full-on national lockdown in the UK, so please remember to obey the guidelines to help get this disease under control. If you would like to see more of my content, you can check out my previous review for Knock Down the House right here on my channel, as well as all of my other Women in Film reviews. New reviews will be coming out every other Thursday. You can also check out my second channel for more casual videos. If you are able, I encourage you to head over to patreon.com/HelenGroteheist, where you can support my channel for £5 per month. October's monthly movie commentary just went up over the weekend, and Tim and I had a great time watching and commentating on The Nightmare Before Christmas, and we think that you will enjoy our rambling as well. So make sure to sign up over on Patreon to get access to that and more goodies. You can see all of my content, past and present, curated over on my website, helen-groteheist.com, link in the description. You can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram to know when new content comes out. I am a little bit less active on social media at the moment, just to try to calm my anxiety, but I do still post, and I will still let you guys know when I have new content coming. Thank you again so much for watching. I really encourage you to watch Little Women again, or for the first time if you haven't already. It is a wonderful and cleansing experience. Please be sure to stay safe, remember to keep living awesome lives, and I will see you all in the next Women in Film review. Bye.